It's a very meticulous and detail-oriented job, which is why in a perfect world you have all these separate departments so that you can strive for perfection in every little system of the car, basically. Sure. So then after the races, they get crashed and banged up or whatever, and then you just bring them back, take them all apart, clean everything, inspect, replace, fix, whatever, and do it all again.
Wow. So it sounds like the engineering departments design the components, and then they hand them to you guys, and you guys have to figure out how to put them on the car and actually make them work.
Yeah, or say, this is not working. This is where you messed up. Here's your drawing. Do it better.
Right. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 92 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We've got Tasso and Tasso joining us today, and we've got another special guest. We have got Miss Heather Holler joining us. And Heather, I actually stumbled across your profile on LinkedIn. And what grabbed my attention is WRC mechanic. Like that was kind of the title. And I reached out because you'd said something like you were coming back to the States, and we were able to find some time to sit down and chat with you. And suffice to say, we have questions. We want to hear all about what it's like to work in the WRC and all of that. So first and foremost, just thank you so much for making the time to chat with us. Really appreciate it.
Hell yeah, dude, no problem.
And just right at the front, if people, like if they listen to this and they want to follow you or see what you're up to, what is the best place to find you, to stay up on what you're up to these days?
Instagram is best, and it's at Miss Shift with an underscore between the Miss and the Shift. It's MISS.
Which is a very, very awesome Instagram handle, by the way.
Thank you. My best buddy in tech school gave me that one. So.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, and maybe just right at the beginning, let's start at the beginning. How did you get involved in working on cars? Like what was that initial motivation?
I beat my boyfriend at the time in an autocross race. Kind of. That's kind of how it started. I was just kind of floating around, didn't know what I was doing with myself after high school. I had actually lived in Germany once before already. I was 19, and I thought I was going to be a professional soccer player. I was supposed to try out for the women's Nuremberg team, had an injury, came back to the US, and we went to an autocross event. And my dad always said, you knew what you wanted to do when it gave you the goosebumps. And I got the goosebumps. Like, it was just so fun. It was so cool. So I sold my SUV 2 weeks later and bought my little Subaru. So I just really enjoyed working on the cars. I kind of had to do it out of necessity because I was broke.
Sure. Sure.
But when I did that, I was like, this is actually kind of cool. I would like to go to school for it. So I went to UTI, found a job 6 months into school as a Subaru apprentice at a dealership. And that's when I learned about rally racing.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Subaru has like a drive performance magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I learned about Vermont Sports Car.
Yeah.
So I basically spent the next 5-6 years working at Subaru, and I started privateer crewing for a summer a little bit just to try to get some experience. Somehow managed to land a job interview in Los Angeles with the team.
Okay.
Drove 9 hours one way for a job interview.
Wow.
So, yeah.
This is a rally team?
Yeah, this is a Subaru rally team.
Subaru rally team. Okay.
Yep.
Very cool.
What was the team you were doing mechanic work for first?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I worked with like Eric Wages and Gino when he was alive. And then there was the Rally Kings one time. Oh my God, I feel awful because I'm forgetting his name, but there's a gentleman, I believe, he's a driving instructor based out of Vegas.
Vegas.
He had a Chevy Sonic. I think that's about it. I only did like a handful.
Was that Pat Morrow?
No.
Ron Fellows?
No. No. Ray Piloto.
Yeah.
Piloto.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that was an interesting one because it was out in Utah, and I guess it was like the first year they tried to have a rally, and like something happened with permits, and I had to cancel.
Oh.
So everybody went out there, did recce and everything, and nope.
I remember hearing something about that. Yeah.
That was. Yep.
There's a crazy amount of paperwork when it comes to setting up a rally, it turns out.
Yeah, I imagine.
Especially here in the States.
Where were you based at the time? Because it sounds like, Rally Kings are SoCal. Were you in SoCal? You said you drove 9 hours. So where are you from?
Yeah, I grew up in Lake Tahoe on the North Shore.
Okay.
So, cool.
Yeah, playing in the desert.
Nice.
Sure.
Well, and so then you got really involved with rally at that point, and was like, I was wondering about this because like when you're a mechanic, that's kind of like a solitary thing. Because usually, especially working at a dealership, you've got your bay, you're just like, you have your stuff to do, and you just like, you're just flagging tickets, you're working on cars, you're doing your own thing. Mm-hmm. Then rally, it's kind of the polar opposite of that because there's a team involvement there. And I think some mechanics can deal with that, and some mechanics can't quite deal with that. So how did you transition into that team environment?
So I always grew up being part of some sort of a team. Playing soccer, I always ski raced, and I was on swim team and track and field. So like, even though it's an individual, like they're mostly individualized sports, like it's still somewhat of like a team effort as well. And I always enjoyed being part of a team. So honestly, for me, it was a really nice transfer over because I didn't like having to work alone, and I like learning from other people a lot. But for me, I feel like the most difficult thing about like motorsport, and it's not even just for mechanics, but anyone involved in motorsport, especially like the higher levels that you go, oh my God, it's such a mentally taxing job. And you really have to be almost more mentally strong than like physically. Like it's wild. Like I've worked with guys that used to be like contractors, DJs, cooks, and they're mechanics or rally mechanics because there's a mindset that you have to have about it.
Especially at that higher level, as the stakes kind of get higher. Like I'm guessing that the tension, the stress kind of builds the higher level you get to.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. I mean, there's a lot more on the line. There's a lot more money involved. At that level, you're paying your drivers instead of them paying you. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
there's, and if you don't do well, you don't get sponsors, and then you don't get a paycheck. So it's kind of scary because you have to be passionate about it. But at the same time, people always warn you, don't get into your passion because you'll lose it. So it's a mental balance that I think you have to have.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably being a mechanic and then working on rally cars for fun or in your free time, and then moving into now that environment is your paycheck, that is your job, that is the environment that you're spending like a lion's share of your time in. Imagine that probably was just a transition in and of itself.
Oh yeah, well, when it's your own stuff, you don't have deadlines. I mean, like sometimes we have 3 days to tear a car apart and completely build it back together. So like,
wow,
it's definitely a different atmosphere in the workshop at that level for sure.
Well, and maybe let me see if I have this progression close right, and correct me here. But did you start working at Vermont Sports Car, like as far as like the professional teams? It went from Vermont Sports Car, then to Dirtfish, and then to the Hyundai WRC team. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. I did a little bit of FD. I worked with RTR and like Von Gittin Jr. a little bit when I first moved down to North Carolina. But other than that, it's mostly been rally and rallycross.
Okay. And I guess now kind of coming out of like your current phase, do you still love it? Do you still enjoy it? Do you kind of miss it and kind of want to still be involved with it? Or are you ready for like a break?
Yes to everything.
Yes. Okay.
Well, so unfortunately, before I left Germany, I actually, when we were tearing apart Oliver's car for the rebuild, he had a pretty bad wreck at the last rally. And so I was a little too complacent, and the damper I was taking out, you have to be careful when you take these cars apart after they wreck, because everything is bent and like under tension. So like shit starts popping off everywhere, and so it happened that the clip for the top of the damper was broken. So when I took the nut off, the whole spring just exploded on the top of my foot. So I've been stuck in my flat in Germany for like 3 weeks doing nothing, going crazy. So I've had my rest.
Okay.
I'm good.
Man, it just took 3 weeks to recover. Yeah.
Through all these stops with these different teams, have you always been a race mechanic? Have you been involved in the engineering process, car development, or just been turning wrenches the whole time, or what?
I've just mostly been a mechanic. When I was with Dirtfish for, I think it was the first year, I don't know, I think ARX was only like a thing for a couple seasons, but one of those seasons, I think outside of being the mechanic, I took care of the fleet of cars for Dirtfish. And so when you have the haulers in your driveway, and there's more to just the mechanics, you have the logistics and stocking the trucks and all that crap. But other than that, no, I did decide to try to go back to school and get my mechanical engineering degree. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I did that when I went to Germany. And somehow managed to get through my first semester. But honestly, I think COVID kind of helped because we were forced to quarantine a lot. So I had time for the schoolwork. And this last year, there's no way. So there's no way. So now that I'm home, I'm going to try to get back on track for that, because I just think even if I don't decide to do design or engine performance, whatever, it'll just make me a better mechanic anyways. So
Sure. Well, maybe just as you started progressing into that professional level, maybe what is the role of a mechanic? So what is your focus? What are you guys tasked with doing? And maybe kind of like fill out that role.
So depending on the team and the budgets and all that stuff, basically the mechanics are there to, I hate to say it, but I kind of joke like we're glorified parts changers.
Okay.
Because like with these manufacturing teams, you have engineers that literally tell you, this is the gearbox we're putting in it. You have a gearbox department. They're the ones that handle rebuilding that. You have an engine department, with Hyundai, you have steering and suspension. And like even on some of the cars, like we don't even touch the wiring, nothing. So we literally install all of the components, but when you do that, you always have to check for clearances, make sure that you have no rubbing on lines, hoses, harnesses. It's a very meticulous and detail-oriented job, which is why in a perfect world, you have all these separate departments so that you can strive for perfection in every little system of the car, basically. Sure. So then after the races, they get crashed and banged up or whatever, and then you just bring them back, take them all apart, clean everything, inspect, replace, fix, whatever, and do it all again.
Wow. So it sounds like the engineering departments design the components, and then they hand them to you guys, and you guys have to figure out how to put them on the car and actually make them work.
Yeah, or say, this is not working. This is where you messed up. Here's your drawing. Do it better.
Right. Which I'm guessing, like when you get up to the WRC level, because of how bespoke those cars are, that probably is not that unusual to happen.
Well, I think I was a little lucky because I was able to kind of be a part of WRC during that transition from internal combustion to the hybrids.
Yep.
And so I spent all of last year kind of experiencing the process of designing a new chassis and a new car. And whereas when we were testing the W7, that's a chassis that they had for 5 years or something like that. So like for the most part, everything was really kind of where it needed to be anyways. But with this new chassis, I would like to think that we have a lot of this because it's a brand new chassis. So we're going to find a lot of places where we can improve, and as a mechanic, it's your job to find where you can make things a little more simpler or lose weight, or you still do have to be a little creative, but you don't need to know.
Sorry, you were there for the transition to the hybrid era. Sorry, my dogs are being crazy.
It's okay. I have
the
one here.
transition to the hybrid era, and then still currently with the team, you've seen the transition to the space frame cars too. I mean, that's a couple pretty significant rule changes and pretty significant retooling. I mean, I
like
don't know.
everything.
Right.
Everything.
Yeah.
Like
But
everything.
I mean, I can't imagine
it's
that learning curve and learning the whole new design of the cars and stuff like that, and the growing pains. With those
I'm trying to be as ethical as I can without yeah, you know what I mean, like sharing too much info, but everything is new. Like I mean, for the most part, everything was new. Like I think like the outside profiles of the gearboxes and engines, I think, are about the same, and that's about it. So like I think the biggest frustration though is like when you have been working for 5 years on a chassis, you get used to it, the ins and outs, and then when you have something dropped in your lap that's brand new, there's always a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. Well, but how much of a learning curve was like now the big electrical system with the hybrids? Because in the dealership environment, like there's some crazy rules. Like
I'm
if you
so glad I don't work in a dealership anymore, honestly.
And it's all for safety. Like there's a special like thing that has to sit on top of the car so that like, okay, this is a hybrid, this is electrical. Like there's all of the wiring are like color coded. I think it's orange or yellow. There's like special insulated tools that you have to use if you're going to work on it. But you're trying to do this in a race environment, in a service, in a I mean, like,
yeah,
was that
I
a change?
honestly, yeah, it's definitely a change, and I honestly think that it's still a change that even the FIA is trying to work out, all of the little details. Like I think it was Craig Breen in Kenya had an off, and no one went to go like they couldn't touch the car because the light on it was like, I think
the little
blue.
green
There was
light.
something weird going on with the light, and people were nervous to touch the car or something. Like, so I think it's a matter of like having even like spectators educated, because that's what I love about rallying. You go off and you have spectators that will drag your car back onto the stage. It's so cool.
Yeah.
But even the spectators need to know about these systems because of this feature of this form of motorsport, So it's a learning curve for everybody. I think the most interesting experience I had with the batteries was so I worked mostly on the third car that was shared between Danny and Oliver. And Oliver had gone off in Croatia, and the car caught fire, and it burned. It burned. And so we had to go recover the car at like midnight that night, and we had to remove the battery that night. So this car is completely charred, smells like ass, it's awful, and we had to wear the gloves until we completely remove the battery. And these gloves are like 4 times the size of your hands. So you like...
Right.
Wow. There's no way. I think, I mean, yeah, there's a way. When there's a will, there's always a way. But
right.
If
it was not
has
easy
to change one of those during a service, good fucking luck.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's probably only a matter of time before they figure out. Like, if I were to think about changing a transmission during a service, that blows my mind. For even that to be possible, but that became common practice, right? Or the ability to be able to do so, right?
Well, that's the beauty about race cars. They're supposed to be easy to work on for that reason. I think honestly, supposed to be. That's the trick. There's a YouTube video, and it's called Gearbox the Movie. I think it's 9 minutes long. And it's from back in the 80s, I think, like Group B era. And there is a gearbox change on the side of the road. I think it looks like the Middle East somewhere. And they do it on an Audi in like 9 minutes. And it's like,
wow.
The cars back then are a lot more difficult, so like them doing that, and I'm sorry, that was just wild to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do it in our cars, I think a little less than that, but back then with no power tools, that's insane. I'm sorry, that's wild.
Man,
there's a video from a few years back before the hybrid era, and I can't forget who it was, but it's one of the mainstay names who had a pretty good off and rolled. and he comes cruising back into service. He gets the car going again, and he gets the quick, check. The cage is good to go, so they go to work on it to get it re-prepped. And the amount of, they do a full rear subframe with both rear corners, new panels, new doors, like the whole nine, and they play the entire service in entirety, 20-minute service or whatever it was in this video. And holy smokes, what they do to this car! It's
we had something similar happen in Kenya, and I don't know how the hell we did it, but we did it. I think we had like 10 mechanics on the car at once. And like right before the service we had, because every time the car, before it comes in, you kind of have like a crew meeting. So, for the most part, every person on the corner has their designated job. And then there's like a workflow, so like you start in your corner, out to in, and then rear to front if you're on the rear, front to back if you're on the front. But so everybody was literally given these little tasks to be as efficient and quick as possible. And like we did welding, and like I think we did like a front subframe, a rear, I don't know, I have it written down somewhere because it was fucking wild. Like I kind of cried a little bit at the end, to be honest, because it was so impressive. But it's freaking wild, honestly, what you can do if you really put your mind to it.
So what was your role with these teams? I'm sure you had different assignments over the years, but so what are some roles that stood out to you, and what's been your favorite role?
So I started out working on the test team, and I love, honestly, like it's hard to say if I love the testing more than the racing, because when I started working for the Subaru Rally team, I thought I was going to be working in rally, and they put me in the rallycross program.
Sure.
So then I did that for also 4 more seasons with Dirtfish. So like this is kind of like my first real rally experience. And last season, we would test in one day what the drivers do in one rally. And we would do that for 3, 4, 5 days in a row. And I liked it because there's no downtime. It's kind of like rallycross. The car goes out, comes back, and you do this for 12, 16, 18 hours a day. And so I like being busy, like downtime kind of kills me. So I really, really like that aspect of it.
Can you just elaborate on that a little bit? So you're saying like effectively run a stage rally miles in one day, and then just the cars back and forth, and so you're servicing the car in that testing period?
Yeah. We usually like for each day we have like a designated area that we test, and if I remember correctly, every team is allowed like a certain number of testing days. And then you're also allowed to test as many times as you want at your home base. So actually, Hyundai decided that we're going to have our home base in Finland, where Toyota is. So we can test as many times as we want up in Finland, but you only have a certain number of days anywhere else.
Okay.
So the FIA will actually help you set up these dates and roads and shit like this, so that you can do proper testing. But yeah, we will literally just do a section of a stage, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for all day.
Wow. And you guys are on call, and just anything and everything that happens, get the car back together so you can continue the test.
Yeah, and I like the test team. Because we don't have to fix a car in a certain time like the race team, but at the same time, like we don't have a big, giant, fancy building. Like we're on the side of the road in the elements, and I kind of like that shit, so I don't mind it. But you're forced to be a little bit more creative with what you have. And because on top of we're in the middle of nowhere on a lot of these stages, whereas the service park for rallying is usually in a bigger populated city or town or something like this. So if you need something, you can go buy it, but not when you're testing.
Okay. Interesting.
So I think it pushes you a little bit more to kind of get creative and problem solve a little bit more than on the race team. But the race team is a way different environment. It's more of a mental game.
Thanks for tuning in. To hear the whole conversation, click below for the full episode of this podcast, or tune in every week on iTunes or Spotify. If you like these episodes, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, because your support is what makes all of this possible. As always, this show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your premier source for any Subaru OEM or aftermarket parts. Check out our website at flatirons tuning.com, and as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.